Oh no. Hi, everybody. Are we all set? My name is Marie. This is my distillery. It's called Moto Spirits, and we're in Bushwick in Brooklyn. And we've been operating since 2000, well, legally since 2016. And what you see behind me is actually the original smaller space where we do our distilling. So you'll see here, distill, and I'll jump into process and even everything that's going on in the space. But first, I'll tell you a little bit about me and how we came to be, who we are, and just to give you a sense of even why I transitioned from being in book publishing over to making spirits in Brooklyn. So our story basically is that my business partner and I, we ride motorcycles, which is why we're called Moto. And you'll see the motorcycle too afterwards, so stick around. And he, my business partner, had first gone on a motorcycle trip to Vietnam and sort of fell in love with the hospitality associated with riding through the backwoods of North Vietnam. And then everyone was welcoming him in and then sharing the spirit, basically, what they called rice wine. But it's distilled, which means basically breaking down, separating the alcohol from the water. And so you're heating it up to temperatures. And when he saw this and he decided that, let's taste all of this. So then he brought it back in these little water bottles and said, Marie, you have to taste this. I need to find it. And he couldn't find it. I tasted it. Needless to say, I think he was colored by the actual experience that he had with the wonderful people. And when I tasted it, I said, this is not something that we can actually produce in a way that is commercially viable. So we started aging things, and everything started basically in a Williamsburg loft bathroom, some explosions, things like that. Then, we progressed over to the actual space that we're in now in Bushwick. And this space here is about 5,000 square feet. And I'm going to keep inviting you to come over in a safe way at some point when all this craziness is behind us. So for now, I think I'll just show you a couple things, but please come at some point. So that's sort of how this distillery started. And if you look at our bottles, and I'll reach behind, so our label, it's Moto Spirits, and you'll see these little circumflexes over the O's. And that actually for us represents the hospitality, like the homes that we were in and visited. And we also make another spirit, and it's called Jabuka. And that was after motorcycle trips that we had taken through Croatia and Montenegro and Serbia. And we adopted the word for apple in Croatian. So Jabuka means apple. And so we make this here in addition to the rice whiskey so this is the Jabuka and this is the whiskey. So I think before I just keep rattling on about our story, but this is sort of how we came together. We have the rice whiskey that after explosions in the bathroom and everything, we ended up moving into this space because we realized it was going to be a viable business. And the whiskey that we make, staying true to sort of the inspiration, is made from 100% rice. And the rice itself is this rice that we get from California, from Coda Farms. And it's sort of a cross between a short grain, almost sushi rice, and almost like a Calrose rice, but not quite the sugar level content. And what we're doing is using the style of rice grain in order for us to make our whiskey. So it took a lot of experimenting to make our rice whiskey. And just to give you a little sense about how to make whiskey. And technically, a lot of people ask us first. So it's rice. Is your whiskey sake? The difference between whiskey and or spirit and sake, which we kind of start off with, is that sake is fermented, whereas when we make our whiskey, it's distilled. So we start off fermenting it, and we have these barrels, basically these 55-gallon drums, and we put our rice in there. We kind of alter and make sure that the water is at a certain pH level in order for it to take on the environment. So the rice and the yeast together is all that we use. So it's rice, water, yeast, and that process is basically fermentation. So you start with a grain and then you move on and you put them in barrels. And for us, it's about a 14-day cycle in order for us to achieve what's called an attenuation rate. And the attenuation rate is basically how much alcohol we have so that then it's ready to transfer it from those bins where the fermentation is happening. And fermentation is basically when the starch in anything that we're using gets converted into alcohol. And it's the starch eating with the yeast eating with the starch. And it's a fun way for us when we say, oh, you know, it's farting now, CO2 is released and during this process, and then alcohol is created. Once we're at a certain attenuation rate, I'll use that word again, we then are able to transfer it from our bins into the still. And we use a mash pump because the process is kind of laborious. And then once we put it into the still itself is where you basically separate out water from alcohol because different levels of temperatures result in heating. And water gets condensed in what's called the Parrot column, and it gets released. And what you're getting is basically an alcohol. And once we're done with this process, we end up going through what's called a stripping run. And for our whiskey, we start off with just a first stripping run, and then we have to do it again. So we do the fermentation process that I just talked about, and then we do another stripping run, and then we combine those two, and we then distill. Again, what's called the finishing run. And that finishing run allows us to then go into, and we transfer them into the barrels. We can, I don't want to get too much in the weeds because I think we're ready to, you know, maybe start drinking and tasting what it is that we've been making here. And if you have any questions, I would please, and I'll keep reminding you about this, you can just email me at info@motospirits.com, and you can ask as many questions, or you could even go into the comments section here and I'll try and answer the questions while we're talking. So I think it might be nice to just dive right into the whiskey tasting. Just one of the questions too that has often come up is, why is it a whiskey? How is it that your whiskey, which is made from rice, why is it technically a whiskey? Any grain that's been fermented, so rice is a grain, and then aged in barrel is technically a whiskey. So what we're going to be tasting is this rice whiskey. And any whiskey, one of the things that you want to do when a question that you might have when it comes to tasting whiskey properly, yeah, you can reach me at info@motospirits.com. So any time that you are tasting a whiskey, there's no right or wrong way. I know often people say those things, but when you're tasting whiskey, it's much more difficult than, and I have my certification as a sommelier in wine, it's much easier for you to pick up a grape than it is, and what style of grape it is that you're tasting in the wine than it is when it's a much more narrow scope when it comes to whiskey. And so what you want to do when you're tasting whiskeys basically is to make sure you don't have, a cold or anything, because you really do want to smell the whiskey. And that's the first thing that you want to do. So one thing that when it comes to smell, and even a lot of questions come up, what is it? I don't know how to describe what it is that I'm tasting. What is it that I'm smelling? And one of the important things that you ought to do is to, and any somm will do this, is basically come up with a list of items that are very typical of either bourbons or scotches. And that can be oranges and cinnamons and cardamom, even things like that start evoking what you will be tasting in your whiskey and your bourbon or your scotch. And I mentioned bourbon because our whiskey is actually aged in bourbon barrels, and bourbon is technically, it has to be made from 51% corn and some other things, but basically that's the difference between just a standard whiskey and a bourbon. But so again, there's no right or wrong way, and it's much like anything else. If I were to say to you, hey guys, have you ever tasted a ground cherry, or what does a ground cherry smell like? And you looked and you said, I've never smelled a ground cherry, then of course you're not going to know what a ground cherry is, and you're not going to smell it in the whiskey. So one of the things that I like to do is, even though I have this in my head too, when I'm doing a real tasting, I pull up, a whiskey, there's a really great site that you can get basically tasting charts, very common things that you can pick up from whiskey. So a tip would be to go to whiskeysmiths.com, and you'll see a whole list of what it is that and this is just to teach yourself how to make this and how to do it. And it's basically this chart, and I'm going to put this up probably either so that you can see what this is, and it'll give you a sense of how you smell something, what it looks like, and from there you can, and much like anything else, it really does take a lot of practice. And I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing for me to say, but you have to practice drinking and smelling. And once in a while, we'll go into more of that, but let's dive into this. One of the things, as I said, you're not going to know what the smells are, but if you look at this list, I'm looking at it now, just so if you go up to whiskeysmiths.com, and you're going to, the best way to smell, let's start off with smelling. So I've poured myself some already, and the best is to actually have a real whiskey glass, which isn't this. This is a small wine glass, but I wanted to take the pretense out of anything that we really need. And so that you can do this if you went into a bar, if you're doing this at home. You have your whiskey glass, you pour enough in, and what you're going to do is take a smell. And what you don't want to do is if you're alcohol sensitive, so you're going to, when you smell, you have your mouth slightly open, and you're going to do an initial smell. And you can do this, which is basically moving it around your nose so that you can open up the smells and you start familiarizing yourself with what it is that you're smelling. And again, really, it's easier when you've smelled and tasted more whiskeys, or if you have even the things that you can play around with to get a sense of this. So once you've done your smelling, and you're going to pick up, at least in our whiskey, you're picking up some citrus notes and some toffee notes, and definitely some vanilla. And you're going to be, as I said, moving it, and you're going to smell this 4 times, and it's going to be a 4 taste. And it's the same with tasting. You're going to do an initial, as I said, your mouth is open, so it's challenging sometimes, but you're also going to be moving, and I'm going to do this. You're moving the glass closer and away from you. What I'm smelling is and I'm very familiar with it, our 84 proof whiskey. And this is not going to run up my nose and give me, a headache. So what you can do is you stay close to it and move it away so that your brain, which is basically trying to familiarize itself with what it is that you're smelling, will pick up some of those notes. And I didn't say this initially, but if you are doing this kind of a tasting, write what you're smelling, and then you can go back to it when you're tasting it and seeing the comparison between what you're smelling and what you're tasting. So if you have a very, very alcoholic spirit that you're drinking, you want to not dive your nose straight into it. Stay a little bit of a distance from it. And again, you're doing sort of a process of smelling. And then let's see what you're smelling, what you're tasting. You're going to oftentimes, when it comes to whiskeys, you're picking up different styles of intensity. You're figuring out if it was an old barrel or a new barrel, and all of these sorts of things are ways for you to learn what it is that you're smelling, tasting. But again, my spirit is an 84 proof, and I know exactly what's in it, so it's a little bit more cheating. There should be some sweet notes. You'll be picking up some sulfur notes. And then, I think you're pretty much ready to start tasting it. The way I like to taste, and again, much like smelling, it's there is really no right or wrong way. There's a more efficient way to do it. And if you're trying to learn how to do this effectively and you want to do it consistently, and you want to geek out about it, you're going to, what I do is I first will just take a sip. The way I normally would. And then, give it a little bit of time. And then the second time, so 4 sips. I know it's kind of hard, right? But okay, so the second sip on a Sunday at 3:17 p.m. is going to, what you're doing is going to be, I did this, but I want you to take a sip and then coat your mouth. You're not swishing it around, but what you're doing is coating your tongue and all of your taste buds, your entire mouth, for about 7 to 8 seconds. And that'll allow your brain, again, in the same way that it was processing the smells, to taste what's happening. And you're getting some of the subtle notes, and there may be some questions also sometimes about where taste receptors are on your tongue. And there's a lot of debunking of the where things happen on your tongue in terms of bitter and salty and sweet. You taste everything in your mouth. There are some places that are much more prominent, but when you're tasting something, you pretty much will be tasting it in a very globalized way, if you want to call it that. And then once you've coated your mouth, what you're going to do is the third sip is basically the third sip not only allows you to drink more, but it gives your brain, which does need a little bit of time for processing, another next level of time to get the more subtle notes. So as I said, we start with just a normal sip. The second one is when you're coating your mouth for about 7 to 8 seconds. The third sip is very similar to the initial sip, but just gives your brain a little time to process the more subtle notes. And the last sip is essentially, I'm not going to do a last sip right now, but maybe I will. So you take your last sip, and that last sip is, going to basically, and everything that we're doing now too, I want you to, while you're tasting all of this, you don't want to run through it like a mad person. And I'm just conscious of time right now. So you're going to smell it, you're going to taste it, you're going to smell it. This whole process of smelling and tasting is actually together. You do this together. You start off with the smelling, but then once you're in the tasting, you find yourself smelling, doing everything that you would initially had done when it came to the smelling process, putting your nose into it, moving everything around. And, what you want to do is you want to pull away from the smells, taste it. You don't want to live with it. When you're smelling, you just keep your nose in there. You're basically going to lose all sense of what you're smelling and tasting. But the last part is, in between this, and then the last one is kind of a normal sip. So just let's do another normal sip towards the end. And again, I think one of the things that we want to be conscious of when we're doing tastings is that this is fun, right? You want to know what to look for, and that you're not completely blind. So as I said, what you want to do is always start, even if you become an expert. I always am a proponent of taking lessons when I go skiing, even though I've skied since I was 7 years old. But every time I get back on the slope, I end up basically getting a lesson and saying, okay, I think I could improve. There's always room for improvement. One of the things that you might ask would be, well, I'm supposed to be drinking all this whiskey, but I don't have an entire treasure trove of whiskey. How am I supposed to, get to taste all of these things? One of the fun ways to do a tasting would be well, it is COVID, so it's a little more challenging, but you can go to a bar that's one of your local bars. And if they're familiar with different styles of whiskey and things like that, and you can, once you become friends maybe with a bartender, and there's a point where you can ask them and say, hey, instead of pouring me a whole pour of this, do you mind doing a little bit of a flight? And then, then you could pull out your geeky list and start going through with exactly what we had done. And that's kind of a way for you to be able to taste more whiskeys. And again, it's what I said, that you have to be able to practice. It doesn't come in 2 seconds. You have to drink more, you have to taste more, you have to smell more and go through this process. The experience is really what you need to do. And it's the same with golf. I suck at golf, but that's why I practice, so that I can actually improve. That's the fun of it. You should always try. So I think the other thing would be, we have a couple of, and I'm not endorsing them or anything like that, but an interesting thing to do would be to get your list that I had originally talked about, which is the Whiskey Smiths, and get a sense of what you're normally smelling, and go to the grocery store and pick up the things that you're going to typically smell in a whiskey, and start smelling those things and writing notes down and circling back to your brain, understanding and getting a sense of what it is that you're actually smelling. Once you have that language, that lexicon, then you'll start recognizing that in other things that you're tasting and smelling. So go to the grocery store, pick up those things. So the fancy way of doing this is there's this, I always forget what it's called, but it's kind of the Aroma Academy. And what they have is, it's about $200 or $300. So it's not the most cost-effective thing, but it's so efficient. And they give you all of the things that you're basically smelling and tasting when it comes to, they have a bourbon one, they have a Scotch one. And if you're able to, then pick up this. And again, it's called from the Aroma Academy. And I also have water here. It's time for a water break, since we've just been drinking. And so practice, practice, practice. And that will give you, a little way to start being able to, that it's almost like a language. Okay, so Aroma Academy, if you have the funds in order for you to get all the, the bourbon and Scotch tasting. And to circle back, before we move into kind of another phase, which will be making our maple old fashioned, would be to, one, there's no right or wrong way to smell or taste a whiskey. There's just an efficient way to do so. And if you want to learn a little bit more, it's practice, practice, practice. Grab your list, write some notes down, and enjoy this process of actually, smelling things, tasting things. And if you have any questions, again, info@motospirits.com, and I will happily answer. Even just send me messages and say, I don't understand, or can you send me links, and I'll send those to you. So I think it's time to make a cocktail. Does that sound good? Yeah? All right. If you have any questions, just let me know, put them in the comment section. I'm paying attention. We have some really cool people helping us out too, helping me out, because it's, as we know, a little bit nuts right now. And I hope everyone is safe. And I'm glad that you're able to join me here. And I'm going to maybe point out a couple things while I'm here before I start making some cocktails. But what I have is, I mentioned before, so those are all our barrels that are aging. Oh, it's this way. Wait, oh, this way. And then no more drinking for me. Well, no, that's not true. And then this is called a column still. And this one actually, it's fractionating. And all of those, it basically, it looks a little steampunk, it's kind of fun, but this is 120 gallon still, and it can function simply as a very traditional, what's called pot still, or it can actually be, and maybe I should walk over here a little bit. So these are plates, and all of those plates allow you to, when you're distilling, separate and slow down the process of separating the water, the condensation, from the alcohol. And you can achieve you might have seen a whole bunch of, this is a significantly smaller still. And you might have seen larger stills with, 10 plates. And that essentially will allow you to make a vodka or a spirit at 190 proof. So all of those levels are basically cutting through and slowing down the process of separation. You can also see, that's my dishwasher. That's not really that exciting. But then all of the barrels that we use here are barrels for aging. And there are different stages of aging. And for us, we tend to go through and do tastings of all of the barrels to make sure there's a thing called, and you must have heard about it, called angel share, or sometimes devil share, to be even about it. And it's the loss of water that goes into the barrel. So it can be, what happens is, if you have a very humid environment, your proof goes down, because the barrels are your proof, which is how you, I think you guys will know, but 100 proof is considered proof. When you start losing water, or you start gaining water based on whether you're in a place that's super humid or not, that dictates what your actual proof will be, how much alcohol by volume, ABV, which is probably something you've seen before too. So you see ABV is the percentage, and you double that and it becomes the proof. So my whiskey is 42% alcohol by volume, ABV, and the actual proof is 84. So you double that. So if you have any questions about that, you say to yourself, oh, that's what the ABV is, and that's what a proof is. And when someone talks about proof is literally 100. So when you get to 100 proof, that's proof. And what that means to someone like me, who's making cuts in the distillation process, is that once I start reaching 100 proof, I know that there's going to be much more of the oils and what's called the tails of the distillation process that I'm tasting. And at that stage also, you find yourself having more, once you add water, which is what happens when you're making whiskey, in the barrel, it'll go in, sometimes at 149 proof, at 140 proof, 150 proof. You're always cutting it down with distilled water. And that water proofs down to our 84 proof. But if you're at 100 proof, often the actual spirit will be cloudy when you're looking at it. So it comes out of the still very clear. And you put it And if you were to add water to it, it becomes very foggy. So that's just one thing. If someone ever asks you, what does that 100 proof mean? You know, why is that even important? 100 proof is also kind of interesting because you might have heard the term, you know, in bond. And when something is in bond, that refers to an American whiskey that from the 1800s, basically, there was this law. And what it dictates what you have to do to your whiskey in order for it to fall under this in bond label. And that's essentially, it has to be at 100 proof, it has to age for 4 years, and it has to stay basically in this bonded warehouse for in a bonded warehouse. But those are essentially the things. So if someone asks you, what does that in bond mean? It just specifically means age 4 years in a facility that's officially bonded by the federal government, you know, which is my case, but we don't make anything for in bond. And that it has, and also that it has to be made and distilled and within a certain time frame from a single process, from January to June or from July to December. And in that time frame, then you're able to call it in bond after 4 years. So again, that's where the 100 proof comes in. And if you have any questions, just shoot them out there, and I'm happy to answer some of those questions. Our barrels, when we use smaller barrels. There's a very big difference between a craft distillery and a commercial distillery. And we are very obviously not only a craft distillery, because everything is done by hand, even our labeling. These are placed because the flasks are really challenging. There's no machine that labels flasks. They're hand labeled, but the difference is the size, just the approach, and even so often what we're doing here is then sort of to bring back a lot of what's happening in our world right now. We're a small operation, and we were making, so you see the barrels are small. We often use 15-gallon barrels or 10-gallon barrels, and we're a 6-year. Yeah, we started distilling officially, and we got our liquor licenses in 2016. We sold our first bottle in February of 2017, but we're super new to this game, and we don't have the resources to have an entire, the huge space. So what we had done is we first started with these very small barrels. And we realized that because of surface area, the smaller your barrels, the faster the aging process. We had initially said, oh no, is this, hold on one second. So just to interrupt, and while I'm doing this, which is kind of perfect because I'm talking about how small we are and everything, we're still open. We're still functioning. Maria is running around batching cocktails. She's doing Grubhub orders. And so that's what that sound was. And I'm just laughing. What is that noise? But so we're small and we have to do all kinds of things. But back to the barrels. So the smaller the surface area of the barrels, the faster the actual process of aging. And even when you look at our labels, and we haven't changed them, even though we're on to batch 26. And for us, everything is single barrel age. We don't blend. We age something, we taste everything, and then we decide whether it's actually delicious and ready, we being ready to actually be bottled. And what happens is, so this is batch 26, that means barrel, whatever number it was, when that barrel is done, we're on to the next batch. So that's sort of how we're operating. And just to also talk about what it is that we had done. So kind of to continue about the small operation versus, a commercial whiskey like a Jack Daniel's or any one of those larger facilities that have been around for so many years. When we had to figure out what we were going to do when March hit, and all of us, we're talking March of this year, the pandemic hit, March 12th, it was declared, and we pivoted our business. And much what you see behind here, what's interesting about us is that we're a manufacturer and we can produce a certain style of alcohol. And because we were able to do that, we pivoted our business and started making sanitizer. It was both not necessarily an ethical, it was a combination of both thought process of what we needed to do to participate and help in what was going on, because so many people around us were talking about not being able to have sanitizer for anything or the cost of it. And so a craft distillery, much like us across the country, in fact, and all the distilleries in New York, if they were able to, started making sanitizer. And the sanitizer that we make is actually ethanol. I didn't go too deeply into the process of distilling, but you're cutting the first thing that comes out of a still when you're distilling is methanol. And that methanol is essentially poison. So you want to get rid of that. You never want to keep that. And this is why I also said, when you're tasting things, you don't want to be sick when you're tasting things. And, occupational hazard, if you're one of the people who was affected by COVID and you lost your sense of taste and smell, if you worked in this industry, it's like, oh my God, what am I supposed to do? I'm going to be poisoning people if I can't separate out the methanol, which is the poison, which is essentially that smell that you get from nail polish. Which is, stay away from it, or ethanol. So ethanol is what you are drinking. So that's the difference between methanol and ethanol. Ethanol. Methanol poison, bad, ethanol. So that's the difference. And so we make a sanitizer. Originally, we were making it we do a lot of experimenting, and what's fun about small batching things is that we were experimenting with Concord grapes from upstate New York. And we had also some taily things, as I mentioned, that we were distilling and just had around from the apples that we had distilled, which makes our Jabuka. We had some rice. So we redistilled all of that together and made it into a super high proof. And then that was our first batch of sanitizer. So it was really fun. We had this sanitizer that, and during the initial stages too, so we could make this. I was telling people, we made a video, in fact, of how to make sanitizer. And if you couldn't do what we were doing, I said, go beeline to the store, get your, what is it called? Everclear, which is 190 proof. And this is how you make it. Turns out when we were making this, naively, no ethanol, no Everclear left, no Spiritus, which is this Polish spirit also that's at 194 proof. But all to say, in our first batch, happily, during this whole process of sanitizer, went to Lincoln Hospital. And we have since, in addition to making spirits and doing to-go cocktails, and this is everything that we're doing to sort of hustle and stay in the game. We haven't closed. We're considered an essential business, much like restaurants, even the farmer's market. The farmer's market never closed. People need to eat. Not that people need alcohol necessarily, but I'm really glad we stayed open because we were able to manufacture sanitizer. And we partnered with New York City. New York makes PPE, and with Hack Manhattan, and we were supplying essential workers and hospitals and even New York State troopers with gallons and gallons of our sanitizer because it was in short supply, as we all know. And while things now, when you think about sanitizer, you're like, oh, okay, I think everyone has sanitizer now. There are differences, you know, and but hopefully you understand now that if you're a distillery, you can actually produce and manufacture and make sanitizer too. And that's what we did. And we're still continuing to. We have totes full of sanitizer. And in fact, one of the things that is interesting about coming up with ideas when it comes to having a distillery, having a skeleton crew, what you're doing is basically saying, okay, what are we doing? We're going to make cocktails now because we can, much like all the restaurants, we have a space outside a tent and you can we bottle our cocktails in the same bottles and that's our to-go. And we make these kits now where you can make your own cocktail, much like what we're going to do now. So I'm not sure who, if you were able to pick up one of our cocktail kits, this will make your life significantly easier. But I'm going to segue into making our maple old fashioned. And stick around. If I'm able to do it, I'm going to move my computer with me and walk out to our main space where we used to have pre-COVID live music events, and we partnered with So Far Sounds, and we had about 175 people here on Fridays and Saturday nights, and had lots of music, and times have changed. So this is, but I hope at some point that we come back to having live performances and things like that, because music is really, I think, important to all of us too. So to go back, if you did get the cocktail kit for making our maple old fashioned, then it would have looked kind of like this. And it comes with everything that you're basically going to need to make a no fuss maple old fashioned cocktail. Everyone loves a good old fashioned. And for us, we use our Jabuka aged, which I didn't go so much into it, but Jabuka means apple in Croatian. And ours, the aged version is aged for almost 2 years in ex-bourbon barrels. And so it replaces a standard whiskey that you can use when you're making an old fashioned. And so before we start getting into that, get all your stuff ready. So you're gonna want to get your booze, whatever it is that you decide to use. You're going to want some ice. What else are you gonna need? So it's your house, right? Get a glass. However way you want to serve your cocktail. And what else do we need when we're making a cocktail? All the other ingredients. I'm going to unpack this just to show you what's in it. For our maple old fashioned, we're using, just for a single serving, we're going to be using 60. So here we function in milliliters, and I know people function in ounces. So 60 milliliters is essentially 2 ounces, which is when you're looking at, here's my little jigger. So see, if you have one of these, then you can use this, or you can, I'd like to say, you know, you might want to wing it, but if you like your booze alcohol-y, and I think what we might want to do too is, even though, and I hope you understand this, even though we are experts in what it is that we're doing, much of the world, and I think our philosophy is that we like taking the pretense out of how we make things. They should be done properly, but there's also flexibility there. And I don't want people to be reluctant to make their own cocktails in a way because they don't have the proper tools. You ought to have the proper tools if you want to make your cocktail, but if you don't have it, you still can make your cocktail. So we have our booze. And then you have, for us, we put our bitters, which is another ingredient in an old fashioned. And this bitters for us is a citrus bitters that we use, orange peel. And the original proof for this is 160 proof that we're steeping the orange into. And it's about a month-long process in order for you to make a proper bitters. And we don't use too much other special ingredients. We like to keep our cocktails very simple. And then the kit also has tree juice maple syrup. And you also don't need a lot of maple syrup. There's a sweetness level that I tend to not like very cloyingly sweet drinks. And so for me, I will have to add a little bit more usually at the end to make it more palatable for people. So we do a lot of testing here. So you're tasting things and you're saying, is this going to be okay? Then we go with it. So for us, when you're making your old fashioned, so you've got all your ingredients. For me, I'm going to use this glass. And the great thing is you're going to take your ice. If you have your bucket of ice, what do you think? And as I said, you're going to use about 60 milliliters or 2 ounces of alcohol. And for us, or your Jabuka, and you can do this. Ooh. Or if you're really geeky, I have to say, I love these beakers. If you don't want to have a whole set of anything, but you want to have a way to measure things or even to sip and drink things, then you can use beakers. And they're super inexpensive, actually. You would think that they were really expensive, but they're not. And then, you do a good 60 milliliters or 2 of those jiggers. Where's my glass? Oh. Ooh. We don't want to water this down too much, so we're going to have to do this quickly, and then that way we can drink it. And then you're going to use 4 milliliters of maple syrup. For us, again, it's tree juice maple syrup because we like to support our friends, and we are very lucky that we actually have friends who make maple syrup. And this maple syrup is amazing. It's from upstate New York. Again, it's tree juice, TREEJUICE maple syrup, and it makes the best cocktails, 100% when it comes to making a maple old fashioned. So you're going to use 4 milliliters. Again, my trusty, or more. It's up to you. It's a good 4 milliliters. And you toss that into your glass. Mix it. You actually can do this with your friends and say, Marie, this crazy woman who makes booze, said this is how we can do it if we can. And you would normally use 2 dashes of any bitters that you want. For us, if you got your kit, depending on how aggressive you like your maple old fashioned, you can, for us, 1 spray, 1, 2, 3, coats the glass in a really efficient way. So these are these atomizers. They're made from glass, and we also use them for our sanitizer. So as you can see, we tend to do things here that allow for, and these are refillable. So if you had gotten one of our maple old fashioned kits from our website or prior to this, or you can fill afterwards, there's no timing on it, then you get this atomizer of the citrus bitters that we make. And so I like to give it 2, sometimes 3, depending on my mood, but this will give you 2 dashes. And then either you have a spoon like this, or a fork, whatever you need, and then you're just going to stir it. And this gives you a very boozy, delicious, oh, last thing. Get your peeler, get your orange. So I learned this from our bartender, and she's probably laughing at me right now because she's actually the person who's taught me anything that I'm doing. So, and you will get your rind of orange. So you have your orange, you have your peeler, and then you're going to do what I love to say is express. This is bartender. I know I sound like a 5-year-old, but then you express not the inside part, and you want to avoid the actual pith, which is the white part. And then you do this, you do this, and then also stir it some more. And then you sip it. Oh, that's delicious. It really is. Perfect for 3:52 p.m. on a Sunday. I really am happy you're all joining me, not just because I'm able to talk about what I love, but also just to hear like a crazy person drinking. So while I think we have just a couple more minutes left, but what I want to do is, this is the cocktail. And as I said, if we had some time, let's take a look at some of the motorcycles. It's going to be just, bear with me. I'm going to have to put this away because we had a little bit of a technical difficulty this prior to this, and I wanted to be able to show you our motorcycles, and my other camera wasn't really doing what it needed to. But this is our main space where I mentioned we had our music events with Moto Spirits, So Far Sounds, and those are some of our motorcycles. I'm going to walk you. This is interesting, right? Like Marie, you're being very annoying, but you can see here, we name our motorcycles. This motorcycle, which is behind me, that has the Moto on it, is sort of a dystopian-esque motorcycle. And it's named Ogre, and the tires on it. So most of our motorcycles here are, which is why, again, we're called Moto, because we ride. Most of the motorcycles are BMWs, not just because we're prejudiced that way, but it just so happened that way. I've been riding for about 5 years, not very long. So I'm a newer rider, but my business partner, he's been riding since he was, I don't know, if together, if you think about it, we have about 24, maybe 25 countries by motorcycle. And he has a thing for BMW. So what happened was I ended up, but my first motorcycle is Twiggy. Twiggy is a CB125 Honda from 1971. And that was my first motorcycle. And then if we keep going backwards, and then I don't know if I can reach, but we'll show you a few other ones. That's Cupcake. And Cupcake is my other motorcycle. And that one's a newer motorcycle. It's from 2018, and it's BMW's first motorcycle that's under a certain CC. I'm going to go back in here. But so that motorcycle, and those are the barrels. So I'm doing a nice little quick tour. And that's Maria, as I told you, because we're actually still working while all this stuff is going on. And then we're going to go here, and we're back in here again. So what the motorcycle, so Cupcake, I want to end with Cupcake. I named my motorcycle Cupcake because Cupcake is a term if you're a passenger on a motorcycle. So if you're the one sitting behind someone, you're known as Cupcake. You're in Cupcake seat. And I said, you're really masculine. I wish you could see it more. We won't go in there, but and when you ride back seat, they said, "Oh, you're so masculine. Let's just name you Cupcake." Anyhow, so excuse me. So I think I'm just coming back into the distillery just to show you. Oh, actually, let's just show you one last thing. You want to see some sanitizer? That's our sanitizer. And that's our motorcycles again. And I think if you have any questions, just shoot me some questions or send me a message on info@motospirits.com. Hopefully you enjoyed yourself. I really did. And hopefully you're able to even support all of the local made in New York City manufacturers. It's real what we do. We struggle, we hustle, we do our best. I tend to be, I'm a woman. Should I say the last things? As you can see, I'm not just tan, but I'm actually Filipina, and much of my industry is not brown, not woman, not Asian, not Filipina. And so I'm kind of proud to be making whiskey in Brooklyn and Bushwick, and would really love if you were coming by. And stay tuned. Go to our website, which is running through motospirits.com. Follow us on Instagram at motospirits.com, and you'll see all the kind of fun things that we're doing. Sometimes we do chair massages outdoors, and this Moto Oasis event that we did was kind of an experiment, all kinds of things. So if you follow us, either go to our website or go to Moto Spirits on Instagram or even Facebook. It's across the board on all of our platforms. You'll get a sense of all the nutty things that we're doing to stay afloat. And I think, again, if you have any questions, I have about 2 minutes before I'm gonna, tell y'all to end, and 2 more minutes. Questions? Anything? Last minute questions? Anything about the distilling process? And I went through it very quickly, but fermentation we didn't talk about so much. But again, I think, let me know. I'm gonna just stay here. Maybe I'll just show you some more. Let's do that. And then we can log off. Ooh, 1 more minute. 1 more minute. Oh, she's cooking up empanadas because we have empanadas from a local spot called Love Nelly. Ooh, can we see it? Ooh. Again, we love supporting, and it's a woman-owned business. And 1 more minute. Okay, what else am I going to show you all? I don't know. It's pretty cool being in this space, so I'm just going to walk around, show you a couple things. And oh, look, there's someone here. And yeah, he's got a skateboard. You can see our tent out. Oh, I guess you can't see the tent very well. And I hope you continue to log in some more, and again, to support all of our businesses, please. New York City needs us all. And I think we're going to be off. Thank you so much, everyone. I would do, what is it that people do? Elbow bump, boom, bow. Thank you. And visit us at motospirits.com, at Moto Spirits, and on Instagram or Facebook. We're on all those platforms. Thank you.